Warning. The following audio story contains themes of being completely unrealistic. This story would never actually happen in the real world. And you know what? I don't care. As a wise purple animatronic once said, sometimes a story is just a story. Enjoy. A Coppernob Christmas. A Christmas audio story by Davisi Director. It was the winter of 1934. I'm sure if you know your history, you will know that the 30s was a time of mass unemployment and great hardship. However, despite it all, there was something keeping the people going, and that something was Christmas. There's just something so magical about the holidays, that even in times of great stress and hardship, it seemingly still found a way to bring people together. But this story isn't about people, it's about engines. It was Percy's first Christmas on the Island of Sodor. With the winter rush and constant need for more trains, the Fat Controller decided to give Percy the opportunity of putting local services on the main line. "You'll only go as far as Kronk," he explained. "Gordon will show you what to do." Gordon did show Percy what to do, to moderate success, and soon Percy was happily pulling passenger trains in no time. He enjoyed his trips out of the yard mostly. One day at around noon, Percy pulled into Kronk with his usual passenger train. There his train would terminate, and he would go and refuel before it was time to go home. This time, however, there was a problem. "The engine to take the next train has been delayed by snow," explained the station master. "Typical for the LMS to ruin our schedule. I need you to take the next train to Barrow." "What about my return trip?" cried Percy. "They'll have to go on Ethan's return trip. Now chop chop, we're delayed as it is." Percy was a little worried. He collected some coaches from the yards and shuffled into platform 1. Soon the passengers were on board and it was time to go. Come along, he puffed. Once he was out in the open countryside, Percy forgot to be worried. He enjoyed seeing new faces and places. He got to see the electric railway at Kildane and even met Reneus at Crovan's Gate. "It's good you're doing your part to help the passengers," he said grandly. "We must always help out whoever we can on Christmas." "Yes, indeed," peeped Percy as he set off, bound for the other railway. Going to Vicarstown was most exciting. The big station stood atop a large viaduct going over the town. Percy looked down at all the cars and people bustling about below. He could see what Reneus meant. A young boy was helping an old woman cross an icy road. Another woman called out to a bustling man who had dropped some of his Christmas shopping out of his basket. These people seemed to embody the very idea of goodwill to all man. Percy crossed the grand rolling bridge and at last puffed into Barrow. Here the shades of blue and green were gone, being replaced by mostly black. A few engines were painted in a deep maroon colour, but not many. Such a colour was only reserved for those of high status. There was no doubt about it. Percy was officially on the turf of the London, Midland and Scottish Railway. He rolled into the yards to fill up on coal and water. As he relaxed and watched some workmen pour salt over some black ice, one slipping over in the process, he suddenly was approached by a black saddle tank engine with 4 wheels. "You're right," they smiled. Percy looked over and eyed the engine. He smiled at once when he realised that they were a saddle tank like him. "Hello," beamed Percy. "It's nice to see another engine like me." "Likewise," chuckled the engine. "I take it you're a Sodor engine, right?" "Yes, how did you know?" "That's easy," piped in another voice. Percy looked up to see another engine rolling in. He was also painted black, but he had 6 wheels and a pair of side tanks. "You're painted green. You don't see many engines painted like that in these parts." "Oh, right," chuckled Percy. In hindsight it was rather obvious. He felt a bit silly now. "Don't make fun, Ginty," cried the saddle tank. "I wasn't, Pug," Ginty replied. "I was merely stating a fact. That's not making fun, you numpty." "Well, I know what you're like," Pug said, rolling their eyes. I'm Percy, by the way," Percy piped in, interrupting the argument. "It's, good to meet you two. I wasn't expecting to see tank engines around here. Gordon makes this place sound like it's full of bossy big engines." "Oh no, it totally is," Ginty smirked. "But who do you think has to do all the shunting around here?" "Us!" Pug beamed with pride. "We have help from other tank engines too, but Ginty and I are usually doing most of the heavy lifting." Percy was impressed. "Now how did you wind up all the way over here?" Ginty questioned. "Well, due to the Christmas rush, my controller asked me to help out with some of the mainline trains." Ginty and Pug couldn't believe their ears. "A saddle tank like me? Doing mainline work?" Pug said in admiration. Well, you know, Percy grinned. I'm quite, I'm good at a lot of different things. Ginty and Pug were most impressed. Percy liked these two engines, and soon the three were chattering and giggling together. Soon it was time for Percy to take his return trip. We hope to see you again soon, beamed Pug. Safe travels, mates, called Ginty. Percy whistled a goodbye and puffed back to the station. As he waited for his passengers to board and for his guard to wave his green flag, Percy decided to have a look around the unfamiliar platform. Admittedly, it was nothing crazy. 3 platforms, a glass canopy going over platform 1 and 2, a red brick station, an engine in a glass cage, people bustling about and... Wait, what? Percy had to double take. There, next to the station building, was what looked like a glass cage of sorts. Inside was an engine. It was like no engine Percy had ever seen before. It was a small red tender engine with only 4 wheels. It had a very long funnel, no steam dome, and an open cab. Its firebox was this big brass dome-shaped thing, which took up a lot of space on the footplate. Its driver and fireman must have been cramped when this thing was still in service. Its paint was coated in dust. What must have once been a striking shade of red was now a dull brown. Its face was worn and wrinkled, with a big grey moustache. Percy hadn't seen an engine look so old before. Not just by build year, the engine physically looked completely worn out. Some people would stop and gawk at the engine. Others, who appeared to be regulars, paid it no mind. A feeling of sadness washed over Percy when he saw this engine, but also curiosity. What was he doing in there? Percy decided to be brave and build up some courage. Excuse me, he called. The engine murmured in his sleep, but still said nothing. Red engine inside that cabinet. Excuse me. Still no answer. Percy decided to give a short peep of his whistle. That did the trick. The engine came up fighting. What the dickens? He cried. Hello? Percy called over. The engine looked over at him. He had a stern, almost fierce look in his eyes. Percy gulped. He regretted waking him up now. Who do you think you are, to disturb an engine's rest? The old engine fumed. Sorry, spluttered Percy. I only wanted to know... Pah! Snorted the engine. Back in my day, young engines were seen and not heard. Now do everyone a favour and stop that whistling. You're at a station for crying out loud. Percy felt very stupid. He looked down at the rails in shame. The old engine winced a little, seeing how dejected the green saddle tank was. But he didn't say anything. He simply went back to sleep. Soon the guard blew his whistle, and Percy headed off for his long journey back home. The sun had just set as Percy crossed over the Vickerstown Bridge, and by the time he got back to Tidmouth it was rather late. Gordon and James had already retired for the night and gone to sleep. Henry was half awake. Madison was talking his non-existent ear off about the latest LMS drama, in which he did not care for. The only one waiting for Percy was Edward. He welcomed him back warmly. Hello, Percy, he smiled. How was your adventure? It was amazing, Edward, Percy peeped. I got to see the electric engines, and the little engines from the hills. Oh, and I made 2 new friends today. Their names are Ginty and Pug. Pug is a saddle tank like me, and Ginty is so funny. Edward was delighted. I'm glad to hear that, Percy, he smiled. Percy then thought, and he remembered the dusty engine in the glass cabinet he saw. His face fell slightly. Edward noticed. Is everything alright? He asked, concerned. Yeah, Percy went on. I just saw this other engine at Barrow too. He was in, like, a glass cage. He looked so unhappy. And he was awfully rude, he finished, his brows scrunching up. Edward thought about what Percy said. Then he grinned. Oh, I know who that is, he laughed. That's old Coppernob. You know him? Percy asked, raising an eyebrow. Know him? I worked with him, Edward explained. He was always getting on mine and my siblings' cases about being cheeky and racing about. Percy was surprised. He couldn't comprehend Edward being cheeky, let alone young. What happened to him? He stuttered. Oh, Edward went on. He was withdrawn in the early 1900s. The railway didn't want to scrap him. He was one of the first engines they ever had running the line. So they put him on display at Barrow and Furness. I see, Percy frowned, looking down towards the ballast. Poor engine. No wonder he was so grumpy when I saw him. That's just how he was from what I remember, Edward said with a chuckle. I wouldn't put too much thought into it. But Percy did put some thought into it. That engine, he seemed so unhappy. Surely there's got to be a reason for him to act in such a way. Maybe he's lonely? He mumbled to himself. A loud snore from Gordon was the only reply. When morning rolled around, Percy was back to shunting about the yards. As he brought Gordon's coaches to the platform, he saw the Fat Controller coming out of his office. "Oh, sir," he called. The Fat Controller looked up and walked over. "Good morning, Percy," he smiled. "How was your journey yesterday?" "It was lovely, sir. I made 2 new friends yesterday, sir. I would love to see them again at some point, sir. If that's alright with you, of course, sir." The Fat Controller pondered. "I don't see why not," he smiled, and he hurried away. He came back later with good news. "Good news, Percy," he announced. "I made a change to the timetable. Tomorrow your train will continue past Kronk all the way to Barrow, with a 10-minute stop at Croven's Gate for you to take on water. Once at Barrow, you'll stay the night and return the following morning." Percy was delighted. "Oh, thank you, sir," he peeped. The following evening, Percy backed down onto his coaches, ready for another long trip. It was cold, the sky was grey, and the street lamps were already starting to come on, but Percy wasn't fussed at all. The guide blew his whistle, and Percy huffed onto the open line. The trip went well. He kept to time, and by nightfall, he reached Barrow. Ginty and Pug were awfully pleased to see him again. "No way, that's Percy again," Ginty smiled half-jokingly. "What? Where?" Pug cried, their eyes darting around. "Hello," Percy grinned as he rolled up alongside. "What are you doing back here?" Pug quizzed. "My controller let me take another long trip up the line. Best of all, I should be staying for the night. We can properly spend time together." "Ah, yes, that's wicked," Ginty hollered. "Sleepover!" Pug cheered. Percy laughed. He did like these two. "We'll join you later, Percy," said Ginty. "Pug and I have more work to do." "Well then, let me help. I have nothing better to do." Ginty and Pug liked this idea, and so they agreed. They told Percy where everything was, and where it needed to go, and the little green engine jumped right in. He worked hard, shuffling goods vans all over the yard. He occasionally caught looks of old Coppernob, snoring away in his display. Percy thought about trying to talk to him again, but he thought it best to wait until after finishing work. A little while later, it was time for the engines to rest. Percy puffed into the Northwestern's very own shed at Barrow, and pulled into a berth. "Come and join," he called to the others. "We can't go in there," Pug cried. "That shed is for the Fat Controller's engines." "Well, I'm a Fat Controller's engine, and, the Fat Controller isn't here." Ginty and Pug looked at each other and giggled cheekily as they rolled onto the turntable and parked into a berth either side of Percy. They soon got to chattering away. Eventually Percy decided it had been long enough. He decided to ask them about old Coppernob. "Who?" Ginty questioned. "The old engine in that cage thingy by the station." "Oh!" both engines oohed. "Yeah, no, we know nothing about him," Pug finally answered. "He don't talk to nobody and nobody talks to him," said Ginty. "He's usually asleep, and when he's up, he's always moaning and complaining that we're working too loudly. I tried talking to him once. He called me a weird little man. I'm not weird, or a man. I'm Pug." Well, I know why he's there," Percy said. "It's to keep him from getting scrapped, my friend Edward says. But it must be such a boring and lonely life." "Well, it's not like he does himself any favours," grunted Ginty. Percy thought, Edward. If you knew Edward, then maybe... And the little green engine began to puff away. "Hey, Percy, where are you going?" Ginty called. "To say hello," Percy said with confidence. The 2 tank engines looked at each other, then they followed. The 3 engines rolled straight to the station. Percy parked alongside the dusty display engine, while Ginty and Pug stayed back at a distance. Excuse me," Percy called, giving a short, yet firm peep of his whistle. Once again, the engine woke up in surprise. "Pardon? Oh, it's you again. What do you want, boy?" I wanted to say hello." "Well, you've said it. Now bugger off." A quiet ooh rang out behind Percy. Percy faltered but stood his ground. Wait, I heard you used to work with one of my friends. His name's Edward and... "Edward? Pah! Don't know who you're talking about." "Come on, he's blue. Wait, no, I guess he would have been red when you knew him? With 4 small wheels at the front and 4 big driving wheels. I think you mentioned something about him being an express engine once. Said that you always told him off for racing about." Old Coppernob actually thought about this. Then it hit him. "Edward!" he cried. That. Percy's eyes widened in anticipation. Even Ginty and Pug were intrigued. That idle good-for-nothing. Oh, never mind. Always rolling around the line with his big fancy bogey coaches. Always saying to me, "Don't have a cow, man. I have no interest in cows or the ownership of them." What was that all about? That was actually kind of funny. Percy started to chuckle. He and the other eight-wheelers, well, let me tell you. They thought they ruled the rails, speeding along at crazy miles an hour, telling me to hurry up with my shunting. Why, I've been shunting before his designer had even developed his first thought. Let me tell you something. Let me tell you what he made me do once. Percy was truly enraptured now. What did he make you do? Chipped in another voice. It was Pug, pulling up alongside Percy. They were truly shocked at the fact that this engine was actually talking to them. I was in the middle of shunting a train at the docks, Coppernob went on, when Edward comes barging in, shouting the odds, thinking he is calling the shots, and tells me to arrange his train. Never mind the fact I was still in the middle of shunting another one. I hate it when big engines do that. What did you do about it? Well, the answer is a bit boring, mind you. I shunted it anyway. I don't know what came over me. Normally I tell him to buzz off, but I suppose I was in a good mood. And then he storms off. Not so much as a thank you, by the way, but with him muddling with my head and distracting me from my other jobs, I accidentally shunted the wrong trucks on his train. He had to bring them all back and collect the right ones. The manager was so cross, he told Edward to take trucks for a week. Percy was shocked. Was that true? Could his Edward ever act in such a way? What happened after? Percy asked. Old Coppernob thought. He thought quite hard about it. It was merely one incident in a very long life after all. His answer was a bit dull. Nothing, I suppose. Guess he learnt his lesson. With good reason too, I'd expect. There was a brief silence before old Coppernob spoke up. "Thank you for listening," he said slowly. He was just as shocked to have someone to even tell his stories to. What are your names?" The three engines all told him. "And, your name's old Coppernob, right?" Ginty asked. "The very same," the elderly engine said, a level of pride in his voice. "Back in my youth, I was one of the best engines around. I was never late, and I always got on with my work, no matter what was asked me. Versatile," he finished grandly. The tank engines were amazed. Percy was especially in awe. "You there," barked old Coppernob. "You're from that other railway. Crossed the channel, correct?" "Oh, yes, sir," Percy said with pride. "What's a little engine like you doing so far out here? You look more like a shunter." "Oh, well, I am," Percy said flatly. "But I could do much more than that. My controller thinks so too. He asked me to start taking passengers to help with the Christmas rush." "Ah, a jack of all trades, I see. Not that different from me in my youth," old Coppernob said. Percy looked closely. Was that a small smile he saw on the engine's face? "It's getting late," old Coppernob boomed, looking at the station clock. "You three best be getting back to your sheds." "Oh yes, Mr. Coppernob, sir, of course." Ginty and Pug said their goodbyes and headed back to the sheds. Percy was about to join them. Suddenly he remembered something. "Oh, one last thing," he called. The old engine raised an eyebrow. "How is it to sit in that box all day?" Old Coppernob frowned once again. This time, however, it was a much sadder frown. He sort of hoped Percy would never ask. "Boring," he sighed, "but it keeps me preserved. I'm an example to the people of Barrow of a bygone era, a representation of history, so I suppose it's worth the sacrifice." "But surely you missed the open line?" I guess so." The antique engine had a look of deep sorrow in his eyes. Percy didn't think he had ever seen someone look so miserable. However, Coppernob quickly snapped out of it. "Now be gone," he ordered. "I want to get some sleep, and so should you." "Well, okay," Percy sighed. "Good night, Mr. Coppernob." Old Coppernob didn't answer. When Percy got back to the shed, Ginty and Pug were already there, chatting amongst themselves. "Oh, there you are. What was the hold-up?" Ginty asked, as Percy rolled in between the two engines. "I'm sorry about that," Percy said awkwardly. "I just wanted to ask him about what it's like to be a static display engine." Ginty winced. His reaction told Percy loud and clear that he probably shouldn't have done that. "What did he say?" asked Pug. "He said it's boring," Percy explained. "While he is proud of being an engine to show off that history, he seems miserable. That's probably why he was so rude before." "It's a shame," Pug sighed. "If only there was something we could do." I wouldn't worry too much about it, guys. I quite frankly still think he's a bit of an arse." The two saddle tanks shot him a look. "What? Oh, come on, you have to admit he is a bit. Still though, nobody deserves that, Ginty, Pug protested. Percy thought and thought about how he could help old Coppernob, even long after Ginty and Pug had gone to sleep. Nobody deserved to be sad and alone on Christmas. Then he had an idea. It was a bit outlandish, but could it work? He had hoped to workshop it with Ginty and Pug that morning, but unfortunately the two engines had to leave the sheds early to begin their work. Percy whistled goodbye to them as he left the yard and headed for the station. He even gave a friendly peep to old Coppernob as he puffed back to Sodor. Old Coppernob gave him a polite smile, but he didn't answer back. Later that day, Percy steamed back into Tidmouth. He headed off to the coaling stage to refuel. Edward was there, also taking on coal. Percy beamed with excitement, ready to tell Edward his idea. "Edward! Edward!" he called. "Long time no see, Percy," Edward joked. "You've turned into a proper adventurer." "Edward!" Percy cried, completely ignoring him. "I'm right here, Percy, there's no need to shout. I spoke to old Coppernob last night." Edward blinked. He hadn't expected that. Oh, really? What did he say? He seemed really down, actually. He doesn't seem to like being a display engine much. But it's okay. I have an idea on how to help him. It's the perfect Christmas present. And what would that be, Percy? Edward asked. So Percy told Edward his idea. Edward grew stern. It's nice you want to help him, Percy, but I don't think that's such a good idea. Why not? Percy squeaked. He was a bit surprised. Well, it's a bit dangerous. I don't think an engine at his age would be able to handle something like that. Oh, come on, Edward. Percy. Please, we could just... No, Percy. Please, could we just... No, Percy. You're not doing that. Both engines were a bit taken aback by Edward's response. The old engine rarely ever raised his voice. A regretful gaze fell upon Edward's face. He swiftly apologised before puffing away. Percy looked down at the rails sadly. All seemed hopeless now. He continued to shunt about the yards for the rest of the day, but he wasn't happy doing so. He sulked throughout the sidings, hissing mournfully. The coaches and even the trucks were worried. What could be wrong? What could be wrong? They all whispered to each other. Later that night at around 11:30, Percy brought the coaches into Platform 2 for the last train of the day. This train was typically pulled by Madison, the other red engine. When Madison pulled into the station, she noticed how downcast Percy was. Oh, Percy, what's the matter, darling? It's been a rough day, Madison, Percy sighed. I made a new friend at Barrow and Furnace, the old engine who's on display. Oh, I know the one. You actually made friends with him. She said that last part with a slight smirk. Not to be nasty or anything, she just couldn't believe that Percy of all engines managed to get on his good side. Yes, he seemed so alone and awfully bored. I had an idea on how I could help him, give him a nice gift, but Edward said it's too dangerous and that I shouldn't go through with it. Well, Edward doesn't know everything. It sounds like you really want to help that old guy out, huh? Yes. Well, do it anyway. I'm sure whatever you're planning can't be that bad. Percy thought about this. But how would I get there? Fancy a lift? Madison said with a cheeky grin. My train terminates at Kronk. After that, you can head straight for the mainland. Percy considered it. Then he returned to Madison the same cheeky grin. If he had the ability to, he would have been nodding. It was on. Woohoo! Right! The two engines raced gallantly down the line. They were both very excited as they raced from station to station, waking up several different households in the process. They soon pulled into Kronk. Percy was uncoupled, and he went to fill up on some more coal and water, while Madison shunted away her coaches. Good luck with your plan, Percy, Madison called, as Percy hurried away down the line. Thank you, Madison, he peeped in response. The journey to Barrow and Furnace went without issue. No trains were scheduled until morning, so Percy happily coasted from signal box to signal box. The night shift signalmen were all bemused to see the little green engine running down the main line so late, but when Percy told them he was doing it for Christmas, they simply decided to let him carry on. Soon Percy crossed over the rolling bridge and steamed into Barrow and Furnace yards. He was expecting everyone to be asleep, but to his surprise he saw Ginty shunting about the yards. He puffed over excitedly. Ginty, he called, I'm glad to see you. Hi, the engine replied. Right, so you know how yesterday we were talking about old Coppernob? I think I found a way to cheer him up. I'm sorry, but do I know you? Percy was confused. His brow furrowed and his face turned into a look of bewilderment. Just then another tank engine pulled up alongside. What's going on here? Percy, what are you doing here? It was Ginty. Our Ginty. Percy was confused all over again. What? He stammered. He thought he was seeing double. Everything alright, Ginty? Our Ginty asked. Yes, Ginty, replied the other Ginty. This guy just came out of nowhere and started talking about a Coppernob. What even is that? Ginty chuckled. Don't worry, mate, he said. Ease with me. I'll take it from here. The other Ginty looked at Percy with a slight scowl before puffing away. That was my sister, mate, Ginty laughed. Percy felt a bit silly now. Now that he thought about it, the two engines did have slightly different nose shapes. So, you're all named Ginty? Yep. Doesn't that get confusing? What are you talking about? Nothing, Percy said hastily, dropping the topic. How come you're up so late? Last minute goods train, Ginty explained. The engine pulling it was absolutely fuming. Keeps grumbling about being woken up and, Actually, Percy, what are you doing here? Oh, right, I'm here because I need your help, Ginty. I'm all ears. So Percy finally told Ginty his plan. Ginty listened. It was certainly an out-there idea. It's risky, but I suppose it's possible. We'll have to wait a couple hours until there's absolutely nobody about. Might have to get Pug on board for this as well. So, we're doing it? Percy asked hopefully. Go on then. Ginty grinned. Percy beamed. He was very excited. He then woke up Pug and told them the plan. Pug was all for it, and so a few hours later, the three engines all met up in the yards. Behind Ginty and Pug was a big crane. You all know what to do? Percy asked one last time. Yep, grinned Ginty. Let's do this! Cheered Pug. The three engines all rolled out and headed to the station. Old Coppernob slowly began to wake up. He wasn't sure why at first. Then he heard the sound of what seemed to be three engines puffing together, all pulling something. Something big. It groaned as it rolled down the line. Coppernob looked all around, only to see Percy, Ginty and Pug roll in, the big crane in tow. They all pulled up alongside and stopped. What's all this? He asked Percy. Has there been an accident? Nope, Percy smiled. We're here to give you a gift. A gift? That's right, old man, Ginty called. We're getting you out of there. It has been a while since you've had a nice run, hasn't it? Pug added. So what about it? Percy asked. Fancy a break from being a display engine and have a nice long run? Old Coppernob stared at the three engines at first with a face of sheer shock and confusion. Then his lips curled into a smile. Go on then. Chains were attached to the roof of Old Coppernob's display case. The crane's engine then began to whir. As it lifted the roof off the pavilion, it then slowly and carefully lowered it down onto a flatbed Pug had brought over. The crane had to be very careful. The thing was made out of glass after all. Old Coppernob shuddered slightly as the cold air seemed to hit him all at once. But once he took a deep breath of some natural air, he relaxed a little. He tried not to show it, but he was excited. Finally, for the first time in 34 years, he would finally get to run again. The chains were quickly fastened to him, and he was lifted into the air and then lowered back onto the fresh rails. So, how do you want to do this? Percy asked the old engine. Should I pull you up the line, or would you rather I push you? Old Coppernob stared. My dear boy, he said indignantly. I'll be fine to travel on my own power, thank you very much. The engines all grew concerned. However, there were two people there that were not worried in the slightest, and they were Percy's driver and fireman. Driver Dave and fireman Ivan were older men. They loved railways and their history. The chance to drive such an antique engine, it made them feel giddy. So they quickly loaded the engine's tender with coal and water and got its fire going. You sure about this? Ginty's driver, a more reasonable railway man, asked. Oh, he'll be fine, scoffed Dave. We'll take good care of him. By the way, could you drive Percy for us? Asked Ivan. What? Ginty's fireman cried. I can't exactly go by myself, Percy chuckled. Ginty's crew turned to their engine. Go on, lads, Ginty winked. And so it was arranged. Ginty and Pug took the crane back to the yards. Ginty's crew then returned and took residence in Percy's cab. By this point it was 5 o'clock. The sun was just beginning to peek over the hills and valleys. It lit up the North English countryside in a yellow glow. Old Coppernob's fire was now burning brightly. The old engine was raring for his journey. I've never seen an engine's fire light so quick, commented Ivan. This man really wants to have his run. Are we ready yet? The old engine asked. We should be, Percy replied. Let's go. The two engines puffed out of the station and towards the rolling bridge. Old Coppernob felt almost giddy with excitement as he puffed onto Sodor soil for the first, and what would be his only time. He was absolutely starstruck by the impressive structure that was Vickerstown Station. The two engines rolled over the viaduct above the town and steamed into the Sodor countryside beyond. The hills were blanketed in white, and the faint yellow glow shone down onto the valley. The two engines enjoyed themselves mostly. Old Coppernob felt like a young engine again. At one point they passed by a house. An old man stood in the doorway, ready for an early shift. His eyes then widened with wonder as he saw the ancient steam engine roll by. Old Coppernob smiled and blew a long, loud whistle. The first time he'd done so in a long time. "Haha, good morning!" he laughed. Then they reached the hill on the outskirts of Kelstorp. Here Old Coppernob slowed down and struggled a bit. "Do you want some help?" Percy called to him. I'm alright, wheezed the old engine as he rolled over the crest of the hill. "See, no trouble!" Well, if you ever feel like you need help, feel free to ask. There is another hill later and it's much steeper. You might have some difficulty and... Whee! Old Coppernob called as he raced down the other side. The old engine had dropped basically all professionalism, now choosing to just live in the moment. Percy smiled endearingly. He was glad old Coppernob was enjoying himself, but he couldn't help but worry that maybe the little red engine wasn't being as careful as he should be. They went through Kildane and Kronk, crossed over the Sodor suspension bridge, and went through Maron. Eventually, they reached Gordon's Hill. Are you sure you can handle that climb, Mr. Coppernob? Percy called. I'm sure of it, the old engine snorted, as he charged up the steep hill. But it was much harder than he had expected. His boiler groaned and his rods ached. His face went as red as his paintwork. Mr. Coppernob! Percy cried. But the old engine was determined. With one great effort, he pulled himself up over the hill. Ha ha! He panted. Take that! Nothing can stop this old boy! But then there was a strange sound. Dave decided it was best to put on the brakes. Nothing happened. Old Coppernob began to roll down the steep gradients. Well, this isn't good. Oh dear, oh no, whoa! The old engine wailed as he hurtled down the hill, going at speeds he had never gone before. Mr. Coppernob! Percy yelled as he charged down the hill after him, giving chase. Old Coppernob whipped round the bend at the bottom of Gordon's Hill and continued down the line. Percy tried his best to keep up, but the old engine was going much too fast. Dave and Ivan were doing everything they could to try and make him stop. They both tried playing the brake hard on together, and when that didn't work, they tried the reverser, but that didn't work either. They both raced through Wellsworth Station, Coppernob whistling fit to burst, waking up basically anybody in a 5-mile radius. Points! Percy yelled to the signalman. The signalman switched Percy onto the same line as old Coppernob, while Ivan climbed atop the coal tender, attempting to couple the two engines together. Percy was gaining on them, and with one last big effort, he shunted right into old Coppernob. Ooh! Thinking quickly, Ivan coupled the two engines together as fast as he could. Get ready! Percy warned, and he screwed on his brakes, trying to hold the old engine back. Sparks flew from the engine's wheels, melting any nearby snow. Slowly and shortly they were slowing down. And at last, the two engines came to a complete stop. The silence was amazing. Both engines said nothing, trying to get their breath back. At last, old Coppernob began to chuckle, and then he let out a big laugh. He boomed. In all my years, I haven't had something like that happen. What a rush! Percy began to laugh too. He wasn't sure why. There was absolutely nothing funny about what just happened. However, the laughing fit was interrupted by a stern voice behind the two engines. What's going on here? Percy jumped and looked back. It was Edward. He'd obviously been staying the night at Wellsworth. Oh, Edward, Percy stuttered. What are you doing here? What are you doing here? Edward demanded. He was cross. It was the first time Percy had ever seen him cross. It was rather intimidating. And who is? Edward trailed off as he realised who he was looking at. Oh no, Percy, you didn't. Well. Old Coppernob smirked. So this is what became of you, Edward. I'll admit, I've never expected to see you again. Most of your class already kicked the bucket by now, and... Thank you, old Coppernob, Edward sighed. I'm surprised to see you in steam again. How was that even possible? Sheer willpower, my boy. Perhaps you'll understand one day. Edward would understand one day, but that day would not be for another 31 years. In the here and now, Edward just felt tired, annoyed, and above all else, extremely awkward. Admittedly, he never thought that he would see old Coppernob again either. Well, you really shouldn't be in steam right now. I mean, you're an antique. And Percy, I specifically told you not to do this, and you went and did it anyway. Percy looked down at his buffers sadly. He knew deep down Edward was right. He'd already messed up here. Hey now, old Coppernob put in. Percy here was only trying to do right by an old engine like me. It's so miserable and stuffy being stuck inside that cage. People standing around staring at me all day. It's just so boring. I just wanted a chance to ride the rails again, and Percy here gave me that chance. He's a very kind boy, and you should be very proud of the little man you've raised here, Edward. Both engines were taken aback. Percy had never expected such kindness from old Coppernob. Edward was especially baffled. Back when he knew him, the old engine had nothing nice to say about anybody. So, the little red engine continued, even if this was my last run, Percy here made it a special run. Thank you, Percy, for making an old engine feel young again. You're welcome, Percy grinned shyly. Edward couldn't help but empathise with old Coppernob's situation. He knew what it was like to be left all alone for a long period of time. With that in mind, he just had to be content. Edward soon coupled up onto the two engines, and together he and Percy took old Coppernob back home. It was broad daylight by the time they arrived. The first trains of the day were already running in and out of the junction. The station master was sitting at his desk, trying to find out where his antique engine had gone. He practically jumped over the desk and ran to the door as the cavalcade entered the station. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "What are you Sudrians doing with LMS property?" "I beg your pardon," old Coppernob spluttered. "I'm much more than just your property, I think you'll find." The station master just ignored him. "I have half a mind to write you up for this." "Please, sir," Percy cried. "It was my fault. I was only trying to—" "It was my idea, sir," old Coppernob interrupted. This time the station master was actually interested in what the old engine had to say. "Go on then," he said with curiosity. "I was telling these Sudrian engines how sad I've been feeling. The static display life is rather dull, you see, sir. I might have encouraged them to take me out for a ride. It was wrong, and I will take full responsibility for this situation." The station master scratched his chin. The story did check out. Percy had already visited this few station several times that week. He sighed. "Well then, old Coppernob, I'm quite disappointed in you. You should have spoken up rather than getting these, outsiders involved." Old Coppernob sighed dramatically and closed his eyes in shame. "What's happening?" Percy whispered to Edward. "Just go with it," Edward murmured back. "That being said," the station master said thoughtfully, "perhaps I have been neglecting you recently. I could make a better effort to make you feel more like a part of the station. Perhaps I could come see you for a regular chat, have the workmen polish your brass a little more, and, maybe I could even decorate your display with flowers or something. Would you like that?" Old Coppernob thought about it. "Do you promise?" he asked. "I do." "Well then, sir," old Coppernob answered, "I would be happy to. Now, if you don't mind, I think I'm ready for another snooze." So old Coppernob was lowered back into his display. It was a little sad to be back here so soon, but admittedly he was a bit pleased to be home. He was tired after the morning's events, and was ready for a long nap. "I'll see you later, old Coppernob," Percy whistled. "Sorry the whole thing went a bit insane at the end." "Oh well, don't worry about it, Percy. It was honestly quite exhilarating. You did a good thing. Once again, thank you so much. You really did give me the best present in the world. I'll always be grateful for that." Yeah, well, it's the season for it. I'm glad I was able to help you. Merry Christmas, Mr. Coppernob. "Merry Christmas to yourself, Percy. Take care of yourself." Percy whistled happily and puffed away towards the bridge. Edward followed in suit, but was quickly stopped by old Coppernob. "Edward!" he called. "Yes?" Edward replied. He didn't show it, but he really did want to leave. He'd already confronted this ghost of his past, and he didn't really want to be around him any longer. "Don't have a cow, man," old Coppernob winked, and then he laughed. Edward was not amused. "Goodbye, old friend," he said shortly, "and Merry Christmas." And he puffed away, leaving old Coppernob giggling to himself. Old Coppernob would continue to live out a happy life, The station master was as good as his word, regularly coming in for a visit and having the workmen decorate the engine's display. It would wind up looking more like a greenhouse than a display case. Old Coppernob loved it. Ginty and Pug would also regularly stop by and tell him the latest news. The three engines would eventually become great friends, all staying in contact to this very day. Old Coppernob is no longer at Barrow. He would later find a new home at the National Railway Museum in York. He sadly is still a static display engine, but he doesn't mind so much now. For now he has plenty of friends around him and a good support system. But he never forgot about the last run he ever had in Christmas 1934. And it was all thanks to Percy the small engine. Ginty, he called, I'm glad to see you. Oh, fuck.